Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video, and subsequently visiting this channel, visiting my channel. So the topic of this video will be on my terminology for typological analyses, because one thing I'm realizing is that I use fairly technical language, and I think it would behoove me, if I want to be understood by people in a certain scope, to explain exactly what I mean when I say certain things, and just really how I view typology. I thought I could make a series of videos called Systemic Foundations that people could reference and look at to understand exactly what it is I'm thinking and what it is I mean whenever I'm analyzing something. But I find that still, I think a majority of what I say says, and the relevancy for it goes deaf. So I thought just make a video explaining basically your terminology and just why is it that you see things the way that you do. So I'll be making a case for exactly what it is I think with typology and why exactly I say the things that I do. First order of business is perceptual landscape. So I think that reality is just an information matrix. It's just a pervading scheme, because honestly, who the hell knows what objective reality really is? But so far as what we can make out and tell in terms of cognitive science and neuroscience is that the brain constructs the reality that we see. So it's a perceptual landscape that people are looking at whenever they're having their experience out in the world. And what I mean is whatever the eye to retinal, whatever the retinal to nerve to brain connection is propagating or going, whatever the brain is thus generating, is a landscape. It's a legitimate landscape of structures of meaning and information extant within it. Extant within it, because nobody walks into a room and sees everything that's there. Your brain legitimately does not process all the things that are going on within a given environment. It just doesn't. Nobody's really objective, as in they know what reality is, independent of their motivations, sentiments, and narrowed frames of focus. You can only really focus on a small amount of information at one time in the first place. And when you look into a room, you only know what you're told in a lot of ways, or you only know what you believe. And things that you don't really know what they are, they don't always stand out to you. It usually takes for somebody to be a little bizarre or different in a certain kind of way in terms of personality disorders, or being open, for them to even get a broader view on just whatever is going on within a given environment. And the brain itself, in terms of its latency of inhibition, is fairly counterproductive to being able to see the world in a fresh and objective way, as we make abstractions, and after time we just have all these expectations and beliefs that are the underlying factors of our perception that determine what we see. It's just that what you see and what you know from the world is just simply what you see and what you know. It's not actually completely all that's there. It's not to say that reality is not there, or that there's no such thing as an objective world, because I don't think that, but I don't think that there's a such thing as this eye is a recording of, that memory is a recording of the past, or that the eye sees whatever's out in the world. The eye sees what the mind tells it and what the mind makes up, and so it's a perceptual landscape, because roughly one can think of the world in the sense that multiple creatures can live in the world, and no different bits of information from the world as a rich landscape of information. It's just an information matrix where when a certain organism is interacting with it, shows itself to be a certain way, but then when another organism is interacting with it, shows itself to be another way. And there's some mesh and overlay in the middle, but perceptual landscapes. And then I say with people that these perceptual landscapes can have dichotomies, that there is only two real distinct dichotomies, and those dichotomies would be being objective or qualitative in one's perceptual landscape. Because, firstly, to me, I think that thinking and feeling are not good terminologies in expressing just exactly what's going on with the person. For the mere fact of this, that people are motivational creatures. They're things that we're creatures that are driven by a base set of motivations, and we're fundamentally social. I think what thinking and feeling gives people the impression of is that some people think and some people just feel, and it's not that way at all. Everybody thinks, just people think differently. Everybody has emotions, just not everybody is responsive to the agencies and the communicators of emotions, which would be feelings, because your emotions come from your drives, and no human being exists without these drives. And we all have some disposition towards the base anthropomorphic drives that make us up, or the base anthropomorphic structures that are there that makes us human. And so I say qualitative and objective just to mean that however, in whatever way, the dominant perceptual scheme for that person is one to take and appropriate themselves and slice up the world in such a manner that we would consider it objective. That they create patterns of meaning from what they parsimony the world into being factors of utility, association, and objectivity in a rough sense, as in they want to understand the world as a system of items and objects relating to one another in terms of base schemas of impersonal properties. And that's just one way to look at the world. It's not necessarily what reality is completely. And I say that qualitative is another, because there are people that legitimately see meaning before they see objects, that they want to slice up the world in terms of the way in which it relates to broader ethoses of communities, or instantiating factors to human survival in terms of the qualitative and subjective creatures we are. They're individuals that care about the subjective workings and happenings of the individual, or the entity of the self and its passages through the world. They care about the transformation of different levels of emotional states, and the emotional states we elicit and excite in one another, and the dynamic of communities and social groups that they try and cement more and stabilize around a certain kind of ethos with things that we call values, which tend to be just the innate irrational agencies that cause us to move and to act in the world, the things that really motivate us. Because a human being is a very specific thing, and they're roughly an amalgamation of competing drives that tend towards the same direction, with this idea of wholeness. But there's no such thing as a indissoluble, unitary kind of person. There's just a collection of things that make up a person that is totally led around by motivational factors. And so they're motivational schemes. How you want to see the world, or how you want to put the world together, because I think of personality as basically a shorthand to take and find out a map of ethics and morality. You know, because very really, one of the concerns for a human being is to be social and to maneuver a dominance hierarchy. And so you can't honestly have an infinite amount of time, one, because you'll die by the time you're 80, at least in modern times. Before, it was about 40, and who knows, it was probably much more abbreviated since then, because honestly, the reproductive systems come on around, like, everywhere from the ages of 14 to about 16, and so that's really, really young in comparison to modern times, but it can definitely, at least I speculate that means that the human animal didn't honestly live for a very long time, and insofar as they probably didn't live till beyond 30 and 40 and things, just probably about, 500 or 800 years ago. So it's just to say that it's not like we have a time now where we can sit in libraries and just collect knowledge for God knows 50 years on a subject or a topic in terms of ethics and morality to know what the hell to do in the world. So personality is really just the shorthand to kind of circumvent that process, because there's something interesting about people insofar as that we're highly plastic and adaptable, but something also really interesting to where we're deeply evolutionarily and biologically instantiated to be types of things that can fit in communities and structures that know how to act, honestly, in a certain way without all that much instruction. And it seems like the more general that ability gets to maneuver multitudes of dominance hierarchies, the greater the correlation that thing has to do with general intelligence. But that's for another point. The main point is this, is that from all this, you should see that the language is to communicate something about the actual way that human beings are, not just to be purely theoretical and I suppose just armchair, though I do all this while sitting in a chair and just thinking about these things. But it's the way I come to understand. It's the way I come to understand things with just with modernity and all the knowledge that we have now. And more so, I would say this, that I think that personality in of itself is only just one item and factor of the expression of a person. I think that that I don't really talk about what people will say and what people will do like other typists, because I think that that's the far more relative piece of the equation rather than the objective, universal, and necessary one, because cultures just change over time and information changes over time, and very really one's levels of education, their geographical location, and their historical location is going to say a lot about just how they think it's appropriate to be in the world. And personalities certainly are consistent over time, but no one person, there's just not this one-to-one correspondence between action and behavior across time periods. Across time periods, people act and behave differently, and it's primarily because in research that we've learned with behavior, and so that really the fact that people behave for a whole number of different reasons that cannot be pinned down to just genetic variance or their temperament. I mean, that just does not explain the whole picture whatsoever. People are really highly contextually based in terms of action and behavior. So what the hell I'm seeing when somebody's acting is only just whatever their immediate motivations are. But the entire stratum of the motivational factors that make up that person and their in the narrowest sense of their existence, insofar as this is the person they came into the world as, I don't know. And you can tell after a certain point in time of spending time with somebody after having a extensive study, I suppose, in typology and personality theory and human behavior, but really, who the hell a person is? I mean, like, I just honestly, I won't know that. And so that's why I don't bother about talking about behavior. I just don't bother with it, because I don't think it's typology. Because I think the maxim of typology is depth psychology. It's about getting to what a person really is, what's going on in them, as I think that the point of typology, which I hope is in the language that I use whenever I'm doing analyses, is to realize actualization and trying to uncover the lost anthropomorphic values that have brought us to where we are in our current time in our evolutionary history. I have different reasons for why I think that's important, but just the point is, hopefully this is making the language I'm using lucid. Also this, that philosophy has been a great tool for me to understand things, and so I'll incorporate words such as existential and metaphysical and phenomenological. Phenomenological is as the world is made known to being. So there's the idea that all that's in the world is being. Things that actually exist are things that are being. That there's, the world is kind of like this amorphous thing that has forms emerging in it that make themselves manifest insofar as they have a salience to a person's being. It's like the world is unveiling and flowering itself to the person, and I think that in the way that we actually exist, our subjective experience, or the organization of our subjective experience, is highly phenomenological in nature, no matter if we are qualitative or objective in our perceptual scheme, because there's so much that can't be accounted for in terms of personality with one person's experience. Like, you can be in a room talking to somebody and you can be analyzing something fairly objectively, but there can be a nagging thought in the back of your mind about something that has nothing at all to do with what is going on in that room. Then you can find yourself basically being projected out from your intuition into some daydreaming fantasy about some concept that you learned when you were 8, and then you notice the girl over across the room that's staring at you and you think she's cute, so you're a bit aroused, but then you're also worried about your friend because they're a little jealous of you. It's just that life in reality, the actual way it reveals itself is so complicated. It's emergent, rather chaotic, and forms make themselves known to you over time, and the strict definition of what is and what's not is not always there in the immediacy of things. So phenomenological is the way that I think is appropriate, and then existential as in the things that are key to our existence, because people exist in the world, and there is this funny feeling of thrownness, because why? Anybody's in their time, anybody in their current time period, born to whatever family they were born to, of differing personality types, born to whatever personality disorders, physical ailments, physical gifts, mental gifts, abilities, talent, tragedy, whatever it is that they're born to, who the hell knows for what reason why, but you suddenly have to navigate yourself in this with this already deeply instantiated evolutionary instinct to act a certain way, which would be your personality. And it's like, how do you not see how this is a bit tragic and needs some sort of reconciliation, I suppose, with the whole broader context of time and the world and whatnot. And I say things like existential always to denote they're things that have a salient landscape to the overall keeping of human motivation. Because it seems like we're all playing this game of trying to figure out the why for maneuvering and climbing up dominance hierarchies. We're all playing this game of maneuvering through a dominance hierarchy and climbing up one. And we always have to be consistently doing this because it's the thing that generates meaning. And meaning just seems to be the psychological substance that makes us persist and reward us. It's somewhat of a neurochemical cocktail between dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and opioids, and a whole host of other things. But it has a great connection with the phenomenon of flow, the Mihai Csikszentmihalyi studies. And I mean, it's the human animal in their most willing and motivated state, which I think has to be something of importance with the talk of personality, because the primary thing we have to do always is to act in the world, given whatever information it is that we receive from it, and make a decision like, oh hell, what do I got to do now, given this or given that. And so that's why I use the language. And the mythopoeticness of it is just because I believe there's some things that I just can't honestly analyze in such a way and give the true expression, because that's too stringent, and there's not enough room for variability given person to person, because people have a lot of variation even within given types. And that's just the motivation for the language that I use. And meta goals would be this, that if you think of people or types like little species, in a sense, and little subgroups within the whole ecology of human existence, if you will, because that's a way I definitely slice people up, then each of them have their thing that they kind of do. They just seem to do it. Because if you come up with the idea that people evolved and then we got into communities and groups, you'll realize that people that exist now had to be people that existed then and were selected for the fact that they brought value and salience to the broader community. And so there's something that I think that each type does that brings value to the overall larger ecology of humanity, and I'm really trying to capture that with their meta goal and their meta question, the thing that they want to do, because value or purpose and salience, I mean, you know, personality, people see it as it can be a negative thing and rather constricting, but the point of it, I think, is actualization. It's supposed to help you stand somewhere in yourself and derive a whole heck of a lot of esteem and a relatively vague, but vague's better than none, idea of where you should go in life and what you should try to do with yourself. Because you got to do something with yourself. You just have to at a certain point in time. And I think personality is something that can help. But I like accuracy more than I like anything else. And I don't mean to complicate the thing, but I just really want it to be in such a way that people can see themselves as they are and understand how they fit into the broader context and picture of being a human being. Because I'm a humanist, and I think human beings are beautiful and wonderful things, though they can be very goddamn annoying and asinine and dumb and just malevolent in all sorts of funny and chaotic ways. I still rather side with people than anything else. I'm not a misanthrope, though people annoy the hell out of me. And so that's just the why for my terminology. And I would say, if I say anything ever that's confusing, instead of complaining about the language, just ask me to explain what it is I said. And I would much rather prefer to do that, because I think that trying to maintain a consistent quality is a much better idea. And if there's anything that I've missed, really, in terms of overall language, such as schematization, which I'll just briefly mention now. Schematization is just based off the Piagetian idea that people take and gather information, they make schemas with it, they're happy with their schemas until they encounter new information. Schemas are just abstractions for how to act in the world. Basically, it's your rules for how the world works. and you're happy with those rules until you encounter some new information that decimates your schemas. Then you assimilate them, make new schemas, you get happy with those, and you do it over and over and over and over again in a little loop. It's the act of equilibration. And we're all looking for equilibrium, essentially. So it's a Piagetian concept, but really what it serves in the way that I think of it is just that the cognitive functions are just little scheme generating things. There's a way that people like to slice up the world, in a way that they like to just make rules for how reality actually, rules for how the world works. And you're not, and I swear, people aren't talking about the world, most types are not talking about the world out there. They're talking about the world inside of the social moray and the dominance hierarchy that we live in, because that's the type of creature we are. And that's why we face epistemological problems with the conclusions that we come to, because actually getting out to objectivity is really hard, and that's why we had to come up with something like the scientific method and mathematics and a whole host of other sort of fun items of analyses and things, just to get outside of our extremely giant social animal selves and the way that we like to think about things and narrate and personify every damn thing. But, okay, I digress. The point is, I say everything I say for a very specific reason, and it's unique because I'm just trying to be accurate, and hopefully this has brought some birth of clarity or lucidity to the whole thing of what I mean, and I don't know, because it was a suggestion by a friend that I make something like this, so there, I did it. Hopefully you found it, well, not maybe interesting, but insightful, and it helps you understand whatever it is I'm saying better. With that, I hope you have a